which is the Karma. Shall I do this now? I'm going to do it after the introduction, but if it's just at the most proper occasion, then I'll do it now. So, it's me and do something fulfilling. So, a few symbolic. Okay. So, I have the honors today. Hi. So I was going to say, in absence of the senior members of the center, the question has just come. I have the honors of introducing Venerable Gyalten Lekden. So first, welcome everyone again to CKSL. Thank you for joining us tonight. So we are actually starting tonight a new teaching program, which will continue for a couple of months on these Saturday evenings in this slot. The topic is Guru Devotion, which, as you may know, is considered the foundation of the path and the starting point for our development in the Venerable tradition of Mahayana Buddhism. And I'm sure Venerable will introduce the topic very eloquently, so I will stop there. And so we are again joined by Venerable Gyalten Lekden. So for those of you who maybe have not met Venerable before, maybe on Zoom, look like, but in case, I will do an introduction. I will start with the usual pedigree and then add a few observations for an extra touch. So Venerable Gyalten Lekden comes from the Boston area in the US. He started studying and practicing Buddhism while he was still doing his undergraduate studies. And he holds a bachelor's degree in theater and religious studies, and then a master's of divinity in Buddhist ministry from the Harvard Divinity School. And he, again, started already leading activities and engaging in Buddhist communities at a young age. And in 2012, he joined the Serajay Monastery in southern India, here in Karnataka, where he continues to study and practice. So Venerable is a registered teacher in the FPMT organization. And so now a little bit of a personal touch, if I may. So what I personally most appreciate about Venerable Lekden's teachings, and I trust I'm not alone, but you may agree with me, are three things. The first, thanks to his extensive language and communication skills and experienced translator, he offers highly nuanced insights into what the texts intend to say, rather than what the words literally say, and therefore presents these insights, or not therefore, but also thanks to that, presents these insights in very clear language. And this makes his guidance sort of beyond dogmatic and very practical and helpful. And I always like that, or it always feels like Venerable provides very nuanced answers to our questions when we ask, and sometimes also to the questions that we don't ask, but maybe have in our mind. And then second, that even though he has been living a monastic life for a while now, it's actually for a decade, right? More than a decade, it sort of always feels like as though he has one foot in the real world of us lay practitioners, the real world, the real world that we lay practitioners live in. And so he always, trying to live a Dharma, practice Dharma life while surrounded by people and expectations that aim in the exact opposite direction. So that again, the guidance there feels very practical, very actionable in our world. And then third, while guiding us, he spontaneously manifests many qualities, including what I would call sort of nurturing care and compassion and patience. So we are very grateful, Venerable, for having you here again. And so since we're starting the topic of Guru Devotion, you may have noticed I started by presenting a kata and an offering in the beginning, like we do in the practices, that because we are asking for guidance on the path to enlightenment, and then for guidance on how to get out of samsara, and what more could we get than that? Then we start with showing respect, as we already all did with prostrating as well, and offerings to create auspiciousness. Thank you so much, Venerable.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this new series. I'm excited to be back at the center. It's been about 2 months off, at least for me. I know there's been things happening at the center, which is quite wonderful. The different meditations, some meditations in the park, some pujas, things like that, which is great. But for teaching-wise, it's been about 2 months. So I'm very happy to be starting a new program. As Alice mentioned, new Saturday and Sunday program for the next 2 months. With 1 day off. We'll have 1 weekend off because of Holi. And we know it's going to be a 3-day weekend because Holi comes on a Friday. So we're going to take that weekend off, that way we're not forcing anyone to choose from a 3-day weekend holiday in the center. But other than that, for March and April, we'll be here, myself and Venerable. So we're very happy to be back. So let's start by setting a very strong motivation. Whatever we've been doing all day today, however we've been spending our Saturday, we let that go. We put it to the side. We recognize that by coming together to study the Dharma, we are creating a sacred space for ourselves, whether that means we're here in the center or online. And that we create a little sacred bubble of practice that we should create whenever we practice. Whether we're meditating or studying, we should always try to create a space that is different than our ordinary way of engaging in the world. And as we come to this space to study the Dharma, to spend time in Dharma community, we realize that we don't do this for our own benefit alone, but we do this so that we might be able to benefit others. So the real goal of our practice is to develop the wisdom and the method that will allow us to be of benefit to all suffering sentient beings, to eliminate their suffering, their worldly suffering, and their kind of spiritual suffering as well, in whatever way we are able to. So we come together today to study, to learn what it means to properly rely upon a teacher in this class, not for our own benefit, but so that we might be able to benefit others. And then if we develop some benefit of our own in the process, then that's wonderful, we rejoice, but the purpose is to be of service to others. And so let's set a strong motivation, a bodhicitta motivation, that we're doing this so we can be of service to others. And with that motivation, we'll offer some prayers to open up our minds, our hearts, to receive the teachings. So let's turn to page 34 of the Gold Prayer Book. And we'll do Refuge in Bodhicitta 3 times in Tibetan, and then once in English. And then we will do the other prayers on these pages, the 4 Immeasurables, 7 Limb, and Short Mandala, all in English. Sangye chiran soki chonam la jantyo paru dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinsogi pesonam gi jola pinche sangye ju par shok Sangye chiran soki chonam la jantyo paru dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinsogi pesonam gi jola pinche sangye ju par shok Sangye chiran soki chonam la jankyo bardu dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinsogi pesonam gi jola pinche sangye drupar shok. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. For my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain into the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for all living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Mandala Kam Niyatayami. Let's continue with offering praise to Shakyamuni Buddha on page 73. The founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in the knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, the supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you, who are wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, forms supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, the Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free, like you, the 3 worlds are not. Incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean. To you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts. To you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, and all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the ways of aging, sickness, and death. And let's offer calling the guru from afar as well, considering the topic. And that's on page 125 of this book, I believe. Lama, think of me. Lama, think of me. Lama, think of me. The wisdom of great bliss of all Buddhas, one taste with the Dharmakaya, is itself the ultimate nature of all kind lamas. I beseech you, Lama, Dharmakaya, please guide me always without separation in this life, future lives, and the bardo. Wisdom's own illusory appearance, the conqueror with several branches, is itself the ultimate basis of emanation of all kind lamas. I beseech you, Lama Sambhogakaya, please guide me always without separation in this life, future lives, and the bardo. The play of various emanations, suiting the dispositions of the many to be subdued, is itself the behavior of the Sambhogakaya of the kind lamas. I beseech you, Lama Nirmanakaya, please guide me always without separation in this life, future lives, and the bardo. The play of the inseparable 3 kayas appearing in the form of the Lama is itself one with the very essence of all kind lamas. I beseech you, Lama of the inseparable 3 kayas, Please guide me always without separation in this life, future lives, and the bardo. All the infinite, peaceful, and wrathful yidams are also the Lama's nature. And since no yidam exists apart from the kind Lama himself, I beseech you, Lama, who comprises all yidams, please guide me always without separation in this life, future lives, and the bardo. The ordinary form of all Buddhas arises in the aspect of the Lama. Therefore, no Buddhas are observed apart from the kind Lama himself. I beseech you, Lama, who comprises all Buddhas, please guide me always without separation in this life, future lives, and the bardo. The very form of all conquerors, wisdom, compassion, and power arises as the Lama. Therefore, the supreme Arya Lords, the three types, are also the kind Lama himself. I beseech you, Lama, who combines the three families in one, please guide me always without separation in this life, future lives, and the bardo. The 105 and three types, however many are elaborated, are the Lama. The pervasive master himself, in whom they are all included, is also the Lama. I beseech you, Lama, as master of all the families, please guide me always without separation in this life, future lives, and the bardo. The creator of all Buddhas, Dharma, and Sangha is the Lama. The one who combines all three refuges is the kind Lama himself. I beseech you, Lama, whose presence combines all refuges, please guide me always without separation in this life, future lives, and the bardo. Thinking of how the actual form of all Buddhas arises in the aspect of the Lama and mercifully guides me, reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of how you showed the excellent, unmistaken path to me, an unfortunate, wretched being abandoned by all the Buddhas, reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of how this excellent body, highly meaningful and difficult to obtain, and wishing to take its essence with unerring choice between gain and loss, happiness and suffering, reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of the experience of not knowing what to do when the great fear of death suddenly descends upon me, reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of the experience of just now suddenly separating from all the perfections of this life and going on alone, reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of the experience of my naked body falling into the terrifying fires of hell and being unable to bear it, reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of how the suffering of hunger and thirst without a drop of water is directly experienced in the unfortunate Preta realm, reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of how very repulsive and wretched it is to become a foolish, stupid animal, and what it would mean, what it would be like to experience it myself, reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of a refuge to protect me from this, since I am now about to fall into the wretched states of bad migration, reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of how white and black actions are experienced and how to practice through thorough and precise engagement and restraint reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of a method to escape this prison of an endless existences, the source of all suffering, reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of the plight of my pitiful old mothers, pervasive as space, fallen amidst the fearful ocean of samsara and tormented there, reminds me of you, Lama. Therefore, Lama, please bless me to generate in my mental continuum effortless experience of the profound three principles of the path in the two stages. Please bless me to strive in one pointed practice of the three trainings with the intense thought of renunciation in order to reach the secure state of liberation. Please bless me to train in the precious supreme bodhicitta with the special attitude, taking responsibility to liberate all migrators by myself alone. Please bless me to follow after the ocean of conquerors with the will to cross to the very end of the great waves of deeds of the conqueror's children. Please bless me to realize the supreme view, free of extremes, in which emptiness and dependent arising, appearance and emptiness complement each other. Please bless me to quickly generate the experience of taking the three kayas into the path, ripening the bases of birth, death, and the bardo. Please bless me to arise as the illusory divine body itself, the play of the four joys and four emptinesses, the wind and the mind absorb in the central channel. Please bless me to meet the ultimate Lama, the bare face of my innate mind, with the covering and perception of true existence and perceiving it as true removed. Please bless me to be one with your three secrets, Lama, and the vast Dharmakaya of great bliss, which has exhausted the elaborations of the two obscurations. In short, please abide inseparably in the center of my heart until the great enlightenment, and mercifully bless me, the child, follow after you, the father. Lama, think of me. Lama, think of me. Lama, think of me. Great. Thank you. That's a really powerful prayer to do regularly because it has the whole Lamrim path and Tantra path combined, as well as being a devotional prayer to the Guru. So it's very powerful in a way. I have an abundance of beverages here. Sorry, I'm trying to juggle them. So the topic for the next 2 months, this class is going to be proper reliance on the Guru. And what had been requested in part was an explanation of Ashvagosha's The 50 Verses of Guru Devotion. And we will do that, but we're going to combine it with Guru Devotion in general. That text specifically is about Guru Devotion or how to practice Guru Devotion in relation to a Tantric Guru. And it's specifically talking about the devotion practices of the body, not of the mind. So we're going to build all the context first and then include that text as well. And so I don't know if we'll go kind of do a little bit of the text at a time. I'm not quite sure. We'll see how it goes. But we will get to that text, but it probably won't be today. But if you would like to read that text ahead of time and commentaries on it, that way you have some familiarity and some questions. There are 2 versions of it easily available. They're both commentaries by Geshe Noen Darge, and they are available. There's a short commentary and a long commentary, and they're both available on the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive website. The short one is actually published by the Tibetan Library of Works and Archives. I don't know how easy it is to get anymore. It's published in the 90s, but it's the same as the quote-unquote short commentary that you find on lamayeshe.com. And then this is the long commentary. So it's just 2 commentaries by the same teacher, Geshe Noen Darge. And what I've done is I've taken out the verses and I've made a booklet of just the verses so we can study it. But the problem is, this is correct. The translation is right, but it's much more than just the verse itself. Like there's added commentary into these. So I think I might translate it myself just to give something that's more direct. So we'll see. If not, then we'll make this available to everyone. But we'll make something available. It's not there yet, just so you know. But well, that would take as much work as translating, So but the meaning is all correct anyway. But for reciting, it's a little bit long, So if you want to have something to recite, this is a little bit long. So we'll see. So there's those 2 commentaries. And then this is also available. This is Tsongkhapa's commentary on the 50 verses. It's called The Fulfillment of All Hopes. And this is translated by Gareth Sparham. This is published by Wisdom. I don't know, you should have a copy in the library, I don't know. Yeah. And so this is Tsongkhapa's commentary on the 50 verses. And they're also translated in here. And you'll see the translations here are a little bit different than those, but again, same meaning. And so this is also a good resource if you are interested in it. And then lastly, just giving resources out at the top of class. This is also a really wonderful book. I haven't read the whole thing. I've only been through parts of it. But this is by Alexander Berzin, who is a longtime student and translator of Sanskrit and Tibetan, and he's also a teacher. And this is called Relating to a Spiritual Teacher, How to Build a Healthy Relationship. And so this isn't a commentary of any sort. This is him synthesizing many, decades and decades of teaching and study into something for Westerners to understand. Basically, our class that we're doing now is in this book to some extent. So this is also a helpful book that you're welcome to study, and it might give you some questions as well. So let's start with those. Okay. Other sources, if you're looking for them, the Wisdom is published the series with Dalai Lama called The Library of Wisdom and Compassion. And they just published the 10th book in the series. It's Dalai Lama and Venerable Choe together writing these books. And now they're done. It's 10 books in the series. The 10th one is an introduction to Tantra. But the second one has a little bit on Guru Devotion as well, of those 10. I don't remember the title of it, but it's called The Library of Wisdom and Compassion by Wisdom Publications. And there are 10 books in that series. And the second one has a few chapters on Guru Devotion as well from the Dalai Lama.
What's the title again? Library of Wisdom
and Wisdom and Compassion.
Yeah.
That's
I'm reading this one.
Oh, really?
The one.
Yeah, there you go. I don't remember so there's 10 books. That's the name of the series. There are 10 books in the series. I don't remember the name of the second one, but if you just look up that series, you'll find it. If you go to the Wisdom website, it's also really clear. And those ones I know you can get digital copies of quite easily. Like you can buy EPUBs. I don't know about the rest of these. Like these were all published, decades ago. So I don't know what's available for these. Okay, that's housekeeping out of the way. But it'd be good if you have time to study on your own, because then you can come to class with more questions and more, you can think about it during the week. It can be helpful. So as we begin class, one of the things I always recommend that we do is we recognize the 3 faults of a faulty vessel. We try to avoid them, right? And we also adopt the 3 attitudes. And we do this whenever we engage in studying any new topic, whether in a formal setting or an informal setting. And I'll explain again what those are, but it's especially important with this class because part of learning how to properly rely upon a guru also means learning how to be a proper student, right? Those two go together. You have to know what are the characteristics of a proper teacher so you can rely on them, but then what does it mean to be a proper student of that teacher is just as important. And so one of the things is knowing what the 3 faults of a vessel are, because that word vessel is one of the words we use when we're talking about students as well, because they're being filled up with the wisdom and experience of their teachers. In Tibetan, the word is nu, or ne. So the 3 faults of a vessel that we want to avoid. The first is we want to avoid being like a vessel that is turned upside down, right? Which is to say that we don't want to attend to any new topic or any new teaching or any new teacher with a mind that is closed off, that feels like it already has all the answers, right? We don't want to let our skepticism turn into cynicism. It's another way of thinking of it. So we want to be open to receiving whatever the teachings have to offer. In the same way that if a vessel is turned upside down, no matter how much water you pour on it, it'll always remain empty, right? And then we want to avoid being like a vessel or a pot, I suppose you could say, that has a crack in it. So no matter how much is poured in, it all leaks out, which is to say when we're attending to any topic that we're studying, we want to be mindful, we want to be attentive, we want to be focused as best we can, which is part of the reason, in our daily lives, we often leave our study either early in the morning or in the evening when we're done with our day, right? We're done working, done going to school, whatever. And in one hand, that's useful times to study, but also can be difficult at the end of a long day to be paying attention, So if you're ever studying, especially or meditating, and you find yourself falling asleep, sometimes it's best just to stop because you don't want to get in the habit of falling asleep while you're practicing Dharma in that way, And so then you have to try to find a way around it. But so you want to be focused as best you can. Avoid being like a vessel with a crack or a hole. And then the third one is you want to avoid being like a vessel that is stained with filth. And so if there is some leftover stain that hasn't been cleaned out, no matter how much water you pour in, it's going to be polluted. And in the same way, we don't want to have preconceptions going into our study or our practice. And again, that's not to say accept everything blindly, right? It's okay to be skeptical, but don't go in there saying, I already know the answer. And that will then poison anything you learn, right? It won't leave you open to actually learning. If you're in a teaching or if you're reading a book or in any environment where something feels, or you have a hard time understanding it, or it contradicts something you already believe, then that's okay. That's an acceptable thing to hold. Then you can think about it and then you can ask questions, right? That's okay. Buddhism is all about learning things on our own, right? But if you go in there saying, no, I know everything, then that's a danger. And that also goes for thinking you know everything about a topic, saying, well, I've already studied refuge so many times, so I don't need to study it anymore. I know everything I need to know about going for refuge. Therefore, I don't have to study this topic. Same thing, You don't want to let yourself have any preconceptions going into a teaching because you can always receive something from it. Especially in the aspect of guru devotion, we say that Tsongkhapa very clearly says, and the Kadampa Geshes all say, that you should treat every teaching from your guru as personal teaching, as personal instruction. So every teaching of the Buddha, especially those that come from your guru, you treat them as personal instruction to you. So that is to say, even if you've already studied a topic, when you go to a teaching and that topic comes up again, take that as the opportunity to realize this is a teaching for me, right? Even if it's something I've studied before, this teaching is for me. And you know what? Sometimes at the end of that teaching, maybe you haven't learned anything new. Like that happens sometimes, okay? It's not like every single time you attend a teaching, you're going to have light bulbs going off. Not immediately. But every time you attend a teaching, you're making yourself more familiar with that topic. Even if you already know the topic, you are making yourself more familiar. So then when you go out of the Dharma Center and you go to practice in the real world, that teaching is closer to your heart, to your mind, right? You're more familiar with it. So you're creating a deeper connection, no matter what. So those are the 3 faults of a vessel we want to avoid. We want to adopt 3 attitudes. First attitude being the attitude that accepts the big picture or the long view recognizing that Buddhahood is very far away. And that is the goal, Buddhahood, not just immediate joy or happiness or comfort, but Buddhahood. But it is a long way away. So that's the extensive, or the big view, the long view. But there's a lot of work to do before we get to Buddhahood. So we have to do the work slowly but surely and not allow ourselves to be disappointed when we don't have immediate results. And then we take the extensive view, or the expansive view, which is to say that there are many different aspects to the path that we have to study. And that, unfortunately, we can't just study one topic and that's all we need. That would be very nice. There's this one thing to study and then we become Buddhas, but there's lots of little pieces. And so instead of letting that disappoint us or turn us away, that should be something that lets us feel joy and excitement, that we get to see all these different pieces and learn how to put them together, right? That we trust that maybe there's something I don't understand about this topic, but I study a different topic, and then all of a sudden there'll be more connections and things will make sense to me, you know? So I know for me, like when I first started studying, learning about rebirth was very difficult, and trying to understand how that kind of cosmology worked was very difficult. And the more I studied karma, then understanding rebirth and the different realms of rebirth came common sense. You know, because I studied karma, which had a whole different topic, then I saw how this topic made sense and they work together, right? Because they don't work one on the other. If you don't have rebirth, karma doesn't really work, right? If you only have karma in one lifetime, it's not as powerful, right? So, but it took studying topic B in order for me to understand topic A. Do you know what I mean? So that's the expansive view, recognizes many different topics and they all fit together to form a cohesive whole. And so we accept that any given topic is a piece of the puzzle, and that should be a source of joy and excitement. And then the last attitude to adopt is one of relaxation, which is to say that after realizing that Buddhahood is very far away and a very lofty goal, and after realizing and accepting that there are many different pieces of the puzzle that we have to study, instead of being tense, instead of being aggravated, instead of letting that beat us down, we have a relaxed mind, a mind that says we are suffering sentient beings who are doing the best we can. And the fact that we're even committing ourselves to any sort of spiritual path is already amazing. And it's much more work than most sentient beings are doing. So we can rejoice in whatever practice or study we have and have a relaxed view that says, I'm doing the best I can. And I don't have to beat myself up over it, right? I don't have to expect to be a Buddha tomorrow, because no one expects that of me. The Buddhas don't expect that of me. My teachers don't expect that of me. They expect me to exert effort, right? That is what the goal is. And so if you can do that with a relaxed mind. As the Tibetans always say, hele che, right? Relax, aram se, right? Same thing, same thing. Take everything easy. Okay, so that's our basis, right? And so to begin with, I think the question, to begin with, 45 minutes in. At the center I used to go attend in Boston, we did about 25 minutes of prayers, maybe 30 minutes of prayers before every class, and about 15, 20 minutes at the end of every class. And we had, all of them were done with nice melodies they'd been translated into English with melodies in mind. So they weren't the normal FPMT translations. There were different translations that fit the Tibetan melodies, or, you know, variations of the Tibetan melody. But they were so long, you know? And I once asked the teacher, like, why do we, like, you know, he's like, he gave all of the right answers, right? About like why we do it, how it's good for us. And he's, and also sometimes people come late. So, you know, we give them a 30-minute window. So the first question is, why do we need a spiritual teacher, right? If we're going to study spiritual teacher, we say the spiritual teacher is the heart of the path, right? That is even the book by Lama Zopa Rinpoche that teaches all about Guru devotion. It's called The Heart of the Path. And Tsongkhapa started the tradition of, when teaching stages of the path, teaching Guru devotion first, right? Before any of the stages. If you read the Lamrim, okay, I guess it isn't first. First is the excellence of the text and the excellence of the teacher, right? He praises a teacher, and he praises his teachers, and he praises the text itself, a teacher's lamp. But then, before he begins the Lamrim topics, he teaches proper Guru devotion, and why that's important, because that's a foundational practice. And so Tsongkhapa really set the stage for us to realize, especially within our lineage, that we need to rely on spiritual teachers. So why are they important? So, I mean, we can also just look at our worldly experience, right? And that can help us. So why are teachers important in general? And that, like, we can't learn everything on our own, or the vast majority of us can. That we need someone to help us. Even if we have all the material in front of us, we have all the books in front of us, you still have to have someone explain it to you and to work out your, your confusions and things like this. So in a worldly sense, it's very clear that we need someone to guide us when we're learning a new topic. And if that's true for worldly topics, and of course it's true to study the Dharma, which is, the most revolutionary topic we can study, the topic that frees us from countless rebirths, like infinite rebirths of bad habits. So it's not like an easy thing to study, or rather it's easy to study, but hard to actually live in an important way. That's what the teacher helps us do. We say that no one knows everything from the beginning, and not even, Pratyeka Buddhas. So Pratyeka Buddhas are solitary realizers, they're called, right? What does it mean to be a solitary realizer? It doesn't mean they realize all the Dharma on their own. A solitary realizer in their last life before achieving tarpa, nirvana. So their solitary realizers don't have bodhicitta, right? So they're one of the on the Hinayana paths. So they achieve nirvana or liberation, but then they still have to become bodhisattvas and become Buddhas. But on the last life, before they achieve liberation from samsara, then they don't receive any teachings from Buddhas. But every lifetime before that, they do. And even in that lifetime, they'll receive teachings, but not verbal teachings. They'll receive mental teachings when they're in samadhi. So even the solitary realizers, that's what they're called, pratyeka Buddhas, still are receiving teachings from others, right? So we all need teachings, okay? If you think that these Arya beings who have already eliminated self-grasping and self-cherishing, or they haven't eliminated it entirely, but they've eliminated all the coarse forms of it, they still receive teachings in order to achieve liberation. Then, of course, beings like us who aren't even on the path yet need to receive teachings. And we have to think that when we practice Dharma, it's not just for this life's happiness, right? But it's for future happiness as well. And of all the things we can do to ensure that we find happiness in this life and in future lives, practicing Dharma is the most important. And so because of that, we want to make sure we're doing it in the most effective way possible, right? And proper, complete practice of the Dharma relies on two conditions. The internal condition is what we call the internal condition, is having a perfect human rebirth. And the external condition is a qualified teacher, okay? And so we need those two conditions. Only having one is not enough. How many people do we know have perfect human rebirths, but they're not using them in any meaningful way, at least as far as we can tell? And then, you could have the best teacher in the world, but teaching a dog, not going to lead that dog to liberation, because they don't have the inner conditions. So we need to have the outer and inner conditions. So what does our teacher give us, Our teachers, depending on the level of teacher, they don't give us simply teachings, right? Our teachers give us teaching. They explain the Dharma. They explain the nature of reality, but they also give us advice. They offer precepts and vows, which is quite important if we want to accumulate merit, right? And then when you get to higher levels, teachers offer transmissions, which connect you to the lineage of teachings that go all the way back to the time of the Buddha. And then they offer initiation into the tantras as well. So these are all things that we need a teacher for. You can read the words of the Buddha, that's not going to connect you to that lineage in the same way as having a teacher transmit those to you would be. So the teacher gives us those, but they also provide the antidotes to all of our obstacles. We think of our practice, and there are so many obstacles to our practice, both internal and external. And a lot of the external ones we can't do anything about, but we can learn how to navigate them in meaningful ways and take those external obstacles, such as having to work, right? That's an obstacle to practice. If you live a life where you need to have a job, that's an obstacle to your practice. So then what the teacher can help you do is, how do you take that obstacle and incorporate it into your path? They can teach you the means to do it. And then inner obstacles, speaking for myself, laziness, pride, all these things, jealousy, all of our negative emotions, our afflictions, those are all inner obstacles to practice, right? Laziness being the biggest one. And so the teacher can help us navigate our inner obstacles and our outer obstacles. And importantly, a teacher can help us analyze our spiritual experiences. So as we study and as we gain some understanding of the Dharma, it's important to have confirmation that we actually know what we're talking about, both in our intellectual experiences and our actual meditation experiences. And so the way you can confirm that is by having someone that knows more than you, and you bring it up with them, and they can confirm it or deny it, or say, no, this is a mistaken experience, or this is a correct experience. I don't know if this is an experience that happens a lot here in India, but in the West, we get a lot of interesting people at Dharma centers, a lot of different like hippies, and also a lot of people with different psychological disorders who sometimes see visions and have other things going on that are due to chemical imbalances, but they want to believe that it's Dharma insight, you know? But they've never studied Dharma, but they believe that they're having these visions, so therefore it must be like spiritual insight. And they come to the teachers to get confirmation that they're having like these amazing spiritual insights. And now as a teacher, or even, you have to find the way to guide them in a meaningful way. You can't just be like, no, you sound like you need medical help. That's usually not the way to guide people. But you have to find that balance of saying, this is something you should practice more. This is something you shouldn't trust, So you need teachers to confirm your experiences. And in order for them to do that, they have to know more than you. So you can't just have anyone as a teacher. But then in the same, in the same vein, our teachers, they challenge us, right? So they don't just show us the path. They don't just present the path to us, but they push us on the path. They challenge us. They put obstacles in our way because they know that we have to overcome those obstacles on our own, right? So a good teacher isn't going to make everything easy for you unless you have the karma where it can be easy. Most of us don't. Most of us have to do the work, right? And by doing that work, we learn something about ourselves. And by learning something about ourselves, our practice becomes more realized. So our teachers will challenge us, they'll push us, they'll make us uncomfortable sometimes. But by doing that, they'll also encourage us and they'll motivate us. So you think having a teacher, think of being in a Dharma community in general, right? And how knowing there are other people practicing the same as you, who are studying the same as you, that when you have doubts, you can go to that community, how that makes you more willing to practice, right? As opposed to being on your own, where you can't talk to anyone about it. Knowing this community makes it easier. Now, having a teacher and then adding on to that. Having someone whose opinion and whose understanding you respect and you believe in, you have some confidence in, is only going to make your practice stronger. So they challenge us, but they also motivate us and inspire us, There's a sutra called the Upada Sutra, where Ananda is talking to the Buddha, and Ananda says he believes that your Dharma practice is most likely 50% due to your teacher and 50% due to your own effort. That's what he asked the Buddha. He's like, this is the case. The Dharma practice is 50% due to the teacher, 50% my own effort. And the Buddha says, no, it's 100% due to the teacher. That it's 100% due to having a spiritual friend, a spiritual mentor, a spiritual comrade, a spiritual community. That's 100% of the practice. And that's not to say you don't have to put effort in, right? But he's just saying this is how important it is to have someone to rely upon. Now that's easy. It's called the Upada. I've only seen the name in Pali, the Upada Sutta I've only seen. I'm not sure what the actual Sanskrit means. The Upada Sutta I've seen it in commentaries, probably in one of these books, to be honest. It's Tibetan, I don't remember. But the point is, even, the way we understand relying on a teacher is different than other contemporary Buddhist schools. Like the Tibetan school and the Tantric school has an extra emphasis on it, but we trace our reliance to the Buddha himself, right? And not just practicing Tantra. As we get to later, there's more than one type of spiritual mentor. And a Tantric master is different than others, but it's not just in the context of Tantra. And so we trace it back to the Buddha himself saying, all of your practice and your spiritual development is dependent upon having a teacher and upon relying upon a teacher properly. Yeah.
Buddha himself, he seemed to have figured it out on his own, or did he have teachers? Maybe in previous lives.
Well, right, we believe that the Buddha was actually already a Buddha when he took the life of Shakyamuni, right? That he showed the aspect of being born as a human. He was already a Buddha before then. But the Buddha himself did have teachers. If you look at in the Jataka tales of the Buddhas who taught him, when he was still a Bodhisattva. So he also did. In the life story of Siddhartha Gautama, he doesn't have any Buddhist teachers, quote unquote, right? Though he did practice with other ascetics who taught him some things, right? Especially about the type of suffering in the world, but they went too far to one side, right? So he did have some teachers, but in the life of Siddhartha Gautama, he didn't have one teacher he relied upon. That's true. So he doesn't show us that example in that life. But if we look at the Jataka tales of his past lives, then there are teachers he relied upon. And even in some of the sutras, the Mahayana sutras, like the Sutra of Golden Light and others, he says at the time of Buddha Ratnashikan, I was a disciple who studied this and so forth. So he gives little examples like that in some of the sutras. I think it's important that we think about what we talk about when we say guru devotion, right? That's the term that we use most often in English. But in Tibetan, we say Lama Tensu. So Lama is a translation of the word guru. Ten is to depend upon or to rely upon, right? The proper way to rely upon a guru or a teacher. So it's not, I think devotion is not incorrect, but it also isn't entirely correct either, right? Because devotion, you can be devoted to things without having a proper appreciation, right? Relying upon a teacher shows the teacher is serving an active role in our development, right? We're relying upon them because they are moving us somewhere. Pure blind devotion isn't the right mindset, okay? The important thing about that quote from the sutra and the Buddha saying that 100% of your Dharma practice is due to the teacher is, at least for me, it is reminding myself that my intelligence and my ego can get in the way of my learning. Like that's the important thing for me, that I'm so used, I'll speak for myself, so used before I found the Dharma and even when I first found it to learning on my own and to being smart in general, right? That my ego is super inflated. And I'm so used to being one of the smart people in the room that I trust my intellect is going to get me anywhere that, my physical prowess can't do, right? That my intellect will compensate. But the problem is when you're opening yourself up to the Dharma, that intellect is a worldly intellect and it will help you. It can make studying easier. It can make some things quicker depending on your practice and your experience, your inference, but can also get in the way, right? Which is to say, not to say that the Dharma contradicts worldly intellect, but it's just a different type of learning. And so if you're confident in yourself in one way, then that confidence becomes ego, it becomes self-cherishing. And so you need to be able to let that go because the Dharma is a revolutionary type of practice. The Dharma is totally new, right? All of my worldly practice is only leading to worldly ends, whereas the Dharma is leading to Buddhahood. And so it's not the same practice I'm used to. So my ego gets in the way of my practice in Dharma. My ego and my intelligence can get in the way of practicing Dharma. And so by saying that it isn't my effort that moves me on the path, but it's my teacher, that isn't to say that the teacher is doing all the work. I still have to do the effort, but it reminds me that I also can be my biggest obstacle as well, right? And so by relying on the teacher and on the spiritual community and on my fellow practitioners, that is what is really going to make my practice stronger and is going to make me a better practitioner and a better scholar. In the end, there's still things I have to do on my own, The Tibetans are famous for doing, 3-year retreats or doing so-called mud retreats where they lock themselves in a cave and they go into a cave and then they build up the mouth of the cave, cover it in mud. So there's only one hole to pass in their food and pass out their waste. And they'll stay in there for a year, 2 years, 3 years, So Tibetans are big on doing solitary practice, but it's all because the guru has given them the tools they need to do that practice. If you were to just go launch yourself into a full retreat, even a 10-day retreat without proper instruction, you can go crazy, Even now, you see, at least in the West, they do a lot of the Insight Meditation Society does a lot of 1-month retreats, silent retreats. And they're not just for Buddhists. Anyone can go on these 1-month retreats. And if if you aren't guided well, depending on where your mind is, 1 month of silent retreat can be really hard. And it's very common to have psychotic breaks, very common. And so good instructors are taught how to navigate students who might be undergoing problems, because we're not used to being alone with ourselves for that often, right? So our teachers give us the tools to let us do solitary practice, So then, of course, saying how important the guru is, all of this, then you have the question, well, I don't have a guru, so therefore I can't practice Dharma, right? What does that mean? That because it can... Right, well, that's true, right? But there is it's a understandable fear when you study, have all these things saying how important the guru is. Without the guru, there's no realization. Without the guru, there's no Buddhahood. Without the guru, there's no advancing in the Dharma. Well, I don't have a guru, so what's the point, right? That's a legitimate fear. It's understandable. And we'll talk more about it a little bit later. But as you said, we need to make ourselves appropriate to receive a teacher as well, okay? And so there is obviously a lot we can do without a teacher, without any level of teacher, even just by our own. Like when I first went to Dharma, and many of us was through books. That I had an opportunity to read books, and Lama Zopa's books, Lama Yeshe's books, other books in translation. Many of us, that's the first interaction we had with Dharma, and it did something to our minds, right? So there's power in studying the Dharma in that way, in self-study. And then being able to talk to other people and be able to, nowadays, being able to go on YouTube and at least learn meditation things. You have to be doubtful sometimes, depending on who the teacher is, if you don't know that they're qualified, But without a proper teacher, there's a lot you can do that will help your mind. And then as you practice more and more, then you'll be able to find a teacher that is suitable for your mind. As you said, it isn't always a magic thing. It isn't like, it's not Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. It's not that kind of thing. I don't know if 90s pop movie references are the right references we make. Sorry, it was a very famous movie with Kevin Costner. He kept having visions that says, if you build it, they will come. And then he built a baseball diamond in his backyard, and people came to play baseball. Very popular in the 90s. Anyway, it's not magic like that, right? But if you aren't at a place in your practice where you can receive a teacher, and then you won't have one, So like I said, in order to understand how to rely on a teacher properly, you also have to know what it means to be a proper student. And for us, for those who aren't born in Buddhist cultures or environments, that takes more learning, Some part of the relating to a teacher in the right way is common to the cultural understanding when you're born into a Buddhist environment, like the Tibetans are. And even to some extent in India, you have some relation to spiritual teachers and gurus that isn't the exact same, but you have the flavor of it. So maybe there's a little bit of ease there. I know for Westerners, though, it's very hard. So they're not just going to appear, And sometimes they'll never come. Or rather, let me put it differently. Sometimes certain people. So one of my friends in grad school was Buddhist, and he spent a few years at Kopan Monastery. And he was not a student of Lama Zopa. And he openly said, like, look, he's like, I know he's your root teacher. When I hear him talk, it drives me crazy. Especially because back then Lama Zopa was coughing quite a lot. This is before his stroke, right, in the 90s. And so whenever he gave teachings, he would cough. It would sometimes it was very hard to understand Lama Zopa in English, especially if he wanted to make it difficult to understand. He sometimes, he was testing people's patience. And he's like, when I'm in his presence, I realize the man's a bodhisattva. I realize he has realizations. I also know that he's not my teacher. That I just can't take teachings from him because it doesn't benefit my mind, right? So you can realize there are people that are incredibly advanced scholars, practitioners, meditators who have realizations. That doesn't mean they have to be your teacher. You can respect them and their practice and who they are without saying they have to be my teacher, right? And in the same way, there's someone that you can be studying with for a long time, and then your experience changes where you realize, oh, this person maybe is my teacher. But for the first 5 years of knowing them, it wasn't like that. So it all depends on us overcoming the obstacles we've created and having healthy relationships with one another, okay? But it's not always like a magical thing, It's not like we see someone and then there's halos of light shining behind them right away. That would be nice. It happens sometimes. One of my friends, he's not a monk anymore, but he's an Australian who was a monk for a long time. His sister isn't Buddhist, but the Dalai Lama gave a talk, I think in Australia, and he brought his sister to the talk. It was like a public talk. And his sister, was very much a hippie and like into, I don't know, earthy, crunchy hippie things. And she was like, she could see halos of light radiating out of Dalai Lama's head. Like she was like, she saw him and she like fell backwards because she like could see light coming this way. And I'm like, okay, So she had some connection, whatever it was. So that happens for some people. It didn't happen for me, It's something you have to cultivate, you have to work on. But so if you don't have a teacher, it doesn't mean you can't practice. And it doesn't mean you're a bad Buddhist. And it doesn't mean that you won't make advancement in your practice. You have to look at what resources you have available to you and make the most use of them you have. And then make sure you're open to having a teacher. But then you don't have to, you don't have to be overeager for a teacher. I think this is a problem we get a lot in the West, is that as soon as people start studying and they hear about how important guru devotion is, then they say, I have to have a teacher right away. I'm nothing if I don't have a teacher. And so then you rush into a relationship with someone that maybe you're not ready to have, or they're the wrong person. And that is worse than not having a teacher, okay? Getting into a relationship with a teacher that is either not appropriate teacher in general or not appropriate for you is going to make your practice harder. It's going to become an obstacle, right? So don't rush into it. Tsongkhapa says we should look at a teacher for at least 12 years and spy on them, like a thief at the night looking in their windows, okay? And obviously we don't have that luxury these days, but we can take our time with teachers. And just know that if you don't have a teacher right now, it doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong, okay? It doesn't mean that that your practice is somehow lacking. As long as you're working on yourself and using whatever resources you have, which means private study, self-study, books, as well as using being part of a Dharma community, then you're moving forward in your practice. That's what's most important, okay? So what does it mean to be a proper student? That's important. I will say there's something cyclical. Be a proper student, you have to understand certain topics, which you understand better once you have a teacher. So, it's like this. But to be a proper student, you have to understand refuge. That's the most important thing, right? You have to understand refuge in the 3 jewels. Understanding refuge is what is the most critical quality for being an appropriate student. But then to understand the 3 jewels, you have to understand what suffering is, and you have to develop the wish to be free from suffering, this mind of renunciation, or some version of renunciation. And then to understand that, you have to understand karma. Or again, by understand, I mean have some knowledge or experience of it. And then, since we practice Mahayana Buddhism, you also have to have some taste of the Bodhisattva attitude or ideal. Those are all important for a student, okay? Now, obviously, you don't have to perfect them before you find a teacher, because then you wouldn't need a teacher if you perfected all of them, right? But to not have any knowledge of them, if you feel like you don't have a good understanding of the 3 jewels and how they operate and what it means to go for refuge, then that means you're not ready to have a teacher yet, necessarily, right? Because that your relationship with that teacher is going to be based more on their charisma than on their understanding, right? Because when we go to someone and we find that person, we accept someone as a teacher, and we'll talk about the qualities of a teacher in a later class, not today. But you want to not look at the charisma or the external qualities, but the inner qualities, right, are what are most important. And so if you don't have a good understanding of refuge, and then in order to understand refuge, obviously, you have to know suffering, renunciation, karma, and so forth. If you don't have that, then you're going to be grasping in the dark. And you could be lucky and grab onto the right Lama, or not, So that's important. So then, if we say, okay, I need a spiritual teacher, I don't have one now, or I have one, but I don't really know how to rely upon them. What does it mean to rely on a teacher? So what is a teacher? I said the word we use in Tibetan is lama tensu. What does that mean, actually? Where does this word guru come from? And so, the Tibetans love their etymology. They love breaking words down. Sometimes whether they actually mean that or not, So we say there's a lot of different etymologies for the word teacher. First, the Tibetans look at the word guru in Sanskrit. And they say guru is gu stands for guna, which is heavy, right? It's a quality, but it also means heavy, right? And it means heavy with good qualities, or heavy presence. And then ru means ruchi, which is like a collection, come together. So a teacher, a guru, is someone who collects all of the good qualities together and is heavy or weighed down by the good qualities, has a presence that is a presence of heavy. In English, we often say like that's heavy, means like that's like overwhelming, not like that. But they, when someone walks in a room and they just have a presence, that's what a guru has due to their good qualities. So that's one thing, guru, guna, ruchi. But then they also say gu stands for guhya, which means secret. And ru stands for rupam, which means body. So secret body, secret meaning the Svabhavakaya, so the essence body of a Buddha, and rupam being the form body. So the enlightened mind, essentially, the enlightened presence of a Buddha and the enlightened body of a Buddha come together in our lamas. So even in the prayer, calling the guru from afar, right? It says, you are the essence of all three kayas, all three Buddhas, all three bodies. So gu, meaning guya, meaning secret, and ru, meaning rupam, also has to do with that same topic, right? That is the combination of the form body and the formless body of a Buddha. They take embodiment in the guru.
Is this etymology of guru in the 50 verses of Ashvagosha?
So everything we're talking about today is all like, you're expected to know this before starting the 50 verses.
Oh.
The 50 verses starts with really how to properly devote yourself to a guru in action once you already have a mind of guru devotion. So it's very much about like how to modulate your behavior around a teacher to engage in proper action around that teacher. So these are things that aren't taught in that because you're expected to already know them, which is why it's not a good thing to start with. That's why we're trying to do a couple of different things at once. They are in here though. They are in this book. He does talk about it quite a lot, about the meaning of the words. So that's guru. But then you also have, the Tibetan translation of guru is lama. And so lama is also two syllables, la and ma. So one etymology of that is la, ba la to la. It means high or highest. You usually see it la me, so nothing higher. There is nothing higher than this, is how you see it quite often. But so la means highest, and ma, in that case, we say represents mother. So highest mother, meaning mother again being the representation of all wisdom, and highest meaning that there is no experience, there is no being that has experience or intellect that is greater than the guru. So their wisdom and experience is insurpassable. La ma. There's nothing higher than the guru. Then in another version, they say that. So the word la, there's this Tibetan idea. It comes from both astrology and medicine. That la is this like life force, this essential life force. If you study astrology, it actually travels on your channels and it starts in one foot and it goes up to the crown of your head and then goes back down to your other foot and then back again. And it's this essential life force. And hypothetically, Tibetan medicine, like they'll know where in your cycle that la is and it matters for something. But so this idea of life force or energy is the word la. And so what they say from that is that that represents the teacher's power, like their energy, their power to overcome all obstacles, which is to say their method, which is to say compassion. So the teacher's power is in their compassion, their bodhicitta. And again, the ma is representing wisdom because the wisdom is the mother of all Buddhas. So the teacher combines method and wisdom, or compassion and wisdom that understands emptiness. So again, that all comes from the word la, ma. So these sound silly, right? These etymologies, but they're important because when we say I'm properly relying on a teacher, the teacher, we should know what we mean by teacher. It's not just someone who knows something, right? It's not just a professor who studied for a long time. That's not what we mean, okay? And then we have the word geshe, right? Spiritual friend you hear quite often, right? And I think we're going to use spiritual friend is Kalya Mitra. It's translated in Tibetan as Gewe Shenyan, and then the Geloks took it as our title, geshe. So whenever there's a geshe, geshe means spiritual friend. But we hear about the Kadampa geshes and so forth. They don't have any degrees in there, geshe means lama, right? It means a spiritual friend. And what do we mean by spiritual friend? Gewe shenyin. So gewa is virtue, and shenyin is a friend. But due to the way you combine the words, both in Sanskrit and English, it can be a virtuous friend, but it can also be a friend of virtue, so someone who is friendly with virtue, or it can be a friend who leads you to virtue. So someone that has this title of geshe, and again, not the academic title, not the title that we're earning at the monastery, but someone that has this title of being a gewe shenyin, a geshe, a spiritual friend, or a virtuous friend, is someone that is leading you to virtue, right? And that they themselves are friends with virtue. That's what it means. So we have this difficulty with terms because the terms are used all over the place, right? So the Gelugpas have taken the term geshe and we use it for our degree. And similarly, the word lama in the Nyingma and Kagyu traditions, when you complete a 3-year retreat, then you are addressed as a lama. You're given the title of lama in those traditions. And many times tulkus in any tradition are given the term lama, right? Just to recognize them as tulkus, so reincarnate teachers. So the terms get used all over the place, okay? So we have to realize when we use these terms in the context of guru devotion, we're being very specific. So just because when we talk about a spiritual mentor or a spiritual teacher, we don't mean anyone that's a geshe, right? But gewe shenyin is a specific type of thing. So if you ever see the term spiritual friend or geshe in any of the teachings, they don't mean us. They don't mean the geluks who studied at the monasteries. Because Tsongkhapa and his students just kind of took that term and gave it as a title. You know what I mean? And the same thing where the Kagyus and the Nyingmas took the term lama and use it as a title. Or the Nyingmas use the word kempo. Like when you finish your studies at the Nyingma monastery, you become kempo, which just means scholar, right? So the terms have many uses, okay? Yeah, well, for them, in their tradition, that's just the title. You earn the title of being a lama. And you earn it by the most common way is doing a 3-year retreat, and then your teacher observes whether or not your 3-year retreat, you've been able to understand the teachings in an appropriate way. And so if you are, then you have earned the right to be called a lama. But so it's a title, you know? And then lastly, the other term we see, and like, you know, in the Tsongkhapa's text, the only term he uses is lopon. So lop, that's Tibetan. Lop means the training, and pon means a leader or a guide. Lopon is a teacher because they guide you in the training. And a lopma is a student, someone who is following behind in the trainings. So those terms are used interchangeably. You also have other terms for student, I think is useful, just so we can understand what it means to be appropriate students. You also hear the term dulja. So someone who is to be tamed is a student, okay? And by taming, be tamed, what it means is to have your afflictions tamed. Not like, you know, it's not a lion taming situation, right? But it's to tame your mind, you know? If we look at the word for the Vinaya, so all of the monastic vows and so forth, that's dua, the way of taming, the type of taming, right? That's what our vows do, is they tame our minds. So someone who is to be tamed is a student. And then also we have the term for student, getru. So I said, gewa is virtue, tru is like a child. So someone who is like childish in virtue. So they need leadership, a getru. You hear that a lot at the monastery. You know, your getru, often gentru it's pronounced. And then lastly, you hear the term, like I said before, nut, a vessel, someone who is open to receive things, right? That term is very broad. We also use that term to describe the world. You see in a lot of sutras, nuchit, nu means vessel, and chut means everything that fills a vessel. So all the world and its inhabitants are nuchit. But that same nu means all students, because we need to be open to be receiving teachings, right?
No.
I guess in English, I'd write it an N then an O with an umlaut over it, N, like that. In Tibetan, you'd write it SNOD if you're writing off the Tibetan letters. But so the reason, and I know like, this is like kind of dry information, but it's important to understand what we mean. Like guru devotion is the heart of it. It is really, really important. And if we don't understand what we mean by guru, and we don't understand what we mean by disciple, then it's going to be very easy to get sidetracked. And it's very easy to think, oh, the guru is a Buddha, and therefore everything they say is perfect, and that's all I need to know. No, like that is like your step 10. We need to get on step 1, you know? So this information seems like very boring and background information, I know, but it's important. And you can just take time to meditate on where in your life. So a good meditation to do, we won't do today, but a good meditation to do, just to either, if you already have a guru, to deepen your confidence in your guru, or if you don't have a guru, to help bring you closer to finding a guru. You start by meditating on things, worldly things in your life that you need a teacher to guide you in, right? So think about something that you don't know, that you need guidance in. And then think about how relying upon a teacher in some way, in this worldly way, has made you proficient in whatever it is. It could be learning how to use Microsoft Excel. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. But think of a thing that you needed a teacher to guide you in. And then think of how relying upon that teacher made you proficient in it and has guided you and has been successful, right? And so you meditate on both of those for a couple minutes each to really develop the sense that, like, there are things in my life, in my worldly life, that I did not know how to do. It's easy to say. The thing with meditating, right? All the topics for meditation, most of them are very easy to say out loud and to understand intellectually. The reason we meditate is so we don't understand them just intellectually, but so we understand them emotionally, right? So we make them inseparable from our minds. So you start by convincing yourself, or reminding yourself of things that you didn't know how to do, that you had to rely upon a teacher to show you. And then you think about how, relying on that teacher, you were able to develop those skills on your own. And then once you have confidence in those two things, then you apply it to your spiritual practice, and you realize how long you've been suffering in samsara and not finding any genuine happiness, and recognize that you can't be free of this ocean of samsara on your own, right? And then from there, you develop the realization or the wish to have a teacher who will show you how to swim to the far shore of samsara and to reach liberation. And if you already have a teacher, then you let your confidence and your devotion, again, for lack of a better term, your reliance upon that teacher become stronger. And if you don't have a teacher, then you allow your mind to become more open to receiving a teacher, to being more appropriate to have a teacher come into your life, right? And this is something you can just add in for 5 minutes on your daily meditation, like this, you know, to make yourself come closer to the teacher. We will do later, we'll talk about specific guru devotion meditations, both according to Sutra and Tantra. But this is a good kind of preliminary one, because it's important that we have a good understanding of what we mean by guru, what we mean by a disciple. And you can say, like, am I at a place in my life where I'm appropriate to be a disciple? Like, do I have enough understanding that a teacher is going to benefit me? Or am I going to be constantly questioning them in such a way that it's not helpful to me or them? You know? Because we can have people in our lives who teach us, who we don't view as a teacher, right? And that gets to the next point. And so we say that they are, they break it up into, again, I'm going to try to use, language is hard. Let's say we have 2 categories. One is a spiritual teacher, and one is a spiritual mentor, okay? So spiritual teachers, we can say there are 3 types. The first, and again, this is just language we're using in this class, so you're not going to find the same language in every book. So you have to know the meanings. Then when you read a book, you can see the language might be confused, okay? But so for the purposes of this class, spiritual teachers have 3 types. The first one is like a professor of Buddhism, okay? That's what I mean by a spiritual teacher, as opposed to, or not mentor, spiritual teacher. So a professor of Buddhism will have a very academic understanding, and they convey that academic understanding to you, and they can teach you something that you didn't know, right? They can be very helpful, but they're not about experiential practice. They're about teaching you the history or the basics, okay? And then you have a Dharma instructor. That's the second type. So whenever you attend a Dharma center, you should expect to at least have a Dharma instructor there and develop that type of relationship with their Dharma instructor, that they have some intellectual understanding and some experiential understanding. And through the combination of that, they can convey something to you that will actually help in your practice, not just in your knowledge. And so part of the reason that FPMT has registered teachers is hypothetically, I mean, the registration itself is a whole ordeal, but hypothetically, anyone that teaches at an FPMT center
will have some sort of combination of intellectual and experiential understanding. So you can go into any FPMT center and have some confidence that even if there's someone teaching that you don't know, that it's appropriate to see them as a Dharma instructor, right? And to have that as your base level of experience with them. So from a Dharma instructor, it's you build upon a Buddhist professor. You have someone that you don't have a relationship between disciple and guru, but you recognize that they have both intellectual and experiential understanding that can guide you and can help you, right? And then the third one, again, we're still in spiritual teacher, not mentor. The third one is someone who's an instructor in either ritual or meditation, right? So they teach you the external forms of what you need to do. So you can be you can find a lot of people that give you great meditation instruction. They don't have to be your teacher, okay? So there are a lot of people who understand how to meditate well and can explain it well, and that will help you in your practice. So in those, you develop, in those three, Buddhist professor, Dharma instructor, and then meditation or ritual instructor, you develop a relationship with them as a teacher because you respect that they know more than you. You respect that they have something to teach you, right? But it isn't the same thing as relying upon them as a guru, okay? But we need those teachers in our lives, especially in the beginning, right? Because all of them are better than just reading a book, you know? As much as I like to go to my cave and read my books by myself and avoid the real world, you need people to help synthesize that material into something useful, right? So the spiritual teachers, we're going to call them, and I'm only using that language because Alexander Berzin uses that language, and the FPMT, you know, in the Discovering Buddhism modules, there's one called How to Properly Rely on a Teacher, and Connie Miller is the one that wrote the transcripts for that, Venerable Connie Miller, and I think she must have read his book because she uses a lot of the same vocab. And this book was published, I think, 4 or 5 years before the FPMT course. And so I'm just trying to use the same language because if you stay in FPMT world or if you read this book, you're going to see that vocab. So I'm trying not to confuse us, right? So that's why I'm using it. And it's easier than thinking up on my own. So those 3 types of spiritual teachers are important, okay? And when you don't rely on them the way you rely on a guru, but you do have to have respect for them. You do have to realize that they know more than you and they can lead you into the Dharma in a way that you can't do on your own, right? In the same way that you respect your professors at university, right? Or at your job, if you have a mentor at your job, when you start a job and they teach you how to do the job, you have respect for them because that is how you learn. If you don't have respect for someone, it's hard to learn from them, right? So those are the first 3. And then we get into the realm of having a spiritual mentor. So this is what we mean when we say a guru or a teacher. What we're actually talking about is a spiritual mentor as opposed to a spiritual teacher. Okay. And so spiritual mentors, we also say come in 3 flavors, let's say 3 varieties. In the same way, there are 3 types of practitioners. So the first one is a spiritual teacher that is related to the Vinaya or the Pratimoksha vows and these kind of things, you know? So the practices that are in common with the lower and medium scope students, you can say those are a certain type of teacher. They often called like a Vinaya or Pratimoksha instructor. And so if you go for vows, lay vows, that is, or for monastic vows, any of the Pratimoksha vows, right? So there's 8 types of Pratimoksha vows, right? You have the lay vows, then the different types of monastic vows and the one-day vows. Those are all considered Pratimoksha vows, vows of individual liberation. That teacher would be this type of teacher, okay? Now, the important thing is that teacher can give you refuge. If you go to refuge for a teacher, there'd be that kind of teacher who gives you refuge. And that kind of teacher would be able to give you vows if you were taking them, either as a lay person or as a monk or a nun. And that type of teacher would teach you about refuge, would teach you about those common topics. Now, for that teacher, you don't have to see them as a Buddha. There's no expectation for you to see those teachers as Buddhas, okay? So even the teacher that gave you refuge, at least according to the texts, there's a little bit more. The first Panchalama kind of changed things a little bit, but according to the text, there's no expectation to see the teacher as a guru. As a Buddha. Even if you accept them as a guru, there'd be a guru your whole life. You've developed a guru relationship with them, especially someone you took refuge with, for instance. You don't have to see them as a perfected being. You still have to have the same level of respect for them. and you still have to have the same type of interaction with them, but you don't see them as a Buddha. You see them as a respected elder, let's say. Then the second type of spiritual mentor would be a Mahayana spiritual mentor. They teach all the topics that are included in the Mahayana practice, up to, but not including Tantra. And the last one would be a Tantra spiritual mentor. Okay. Now, according to the texts, a Mahayana spiritual mentor, since the Mahayana practice understands that the bodhisattvas are all emanations of the Buddha, the most common is to, I think Windows is trying to update.
Okay.
The most common is to see a Mahayana spiritual mentor as a Buddha, as an emanation of the Buddha taking this form. That's most common. But technically, according to the texts, it isn't required. Okay, you can still develop a lifelong relationship with a Mahayana spiritual friend that does not see them as a Buddha, but it is most common. It is the common way to engage in them because that is what makes the relationship more meaningful, right? The reason we see our teachers as Buddhas isn't because we want to put them up on pedestals. It's because that's the way they can affect our minds to the greatest degree, right? By seeing them as perfected beings, it allows our minds to be expanded in ways that isn't possible if we don't see them that way. Now, anyone you take as a Tantra guru, you have to see as a Buddha, because practice of engaging in Tantra practice, you have to be able to see all the Buddhas that you visualize in the Tantra practice are your guru taking the form of those Buddhas, right? So to have someone as a Tantric guru or a spiritual mentor, you have to see them as a Buddha. It's most common to see the Mahayana also as a Buddha. Technically, is not required. Now, the thing is, I say that, starting with the first Panchen Lama started a practice of saying that anyone who you see as a teacher is an emanation of a Buddha, and that it's more beneficial to see all of your teachers as emanations of Buddhas. And so that is how it's most commonly taught in our tradition and in our lineage. And that is the way Tsongkhapa and Pabong Rinpoche also teach it. If you look at the old texts that they're based on, that they are using, that's not 100% required, okay? And so if you want to develop a lifetime relationship with a teacher, but you're not at a place where you can see them as a Buddha, there are ways that you can go about doing that are appropriate and are within the teachings of the Buddha. And then maybe it can develop into something else. But you should understand that whenever you read our texts, anything starting from the first Panchen Lama onward, they're going to say that even the teacher who taught you how to read, you have to see as a Buddha, right? There's an example given by, who gives it? I don't remember who, but the example is of this famous monk who wasn't able to achieve any realizations because there was a woman. Yeah, because she was a nun that had disrobed. So he was excluding the teacher who had taught him the alphabet because it was a nun who had disrobed. And because he was excluding her from being a Buddha in his Buddha field, in his visualization, then it held him back from realizations. That's an example that's given, okay? For us, that's a little different because you have to remember in that context, the reason, especially in Tibet and in ancient India, the reason you learn to write, is especially true in Tibet, is so you could study the teachings, okay? In ancient Tibet, the only people that were learning how to write and read were monks and nuns or politicians. That's it. No one else. It was just not common, you know? And so the only reason you would learn how to read is so you could read the Dharma. And so, of course, the person teaching you to read is teaching you how to engage in Dharma practice. That's why it was so important. So for us, it's not quite the same. But what they say is once we actually have a guru, like a guru, a root guru. So what's a root guru? So I said there's three types of spiritual mentor, right? The Pratimoksha, Mahayana, and Tantra. And these obviously build on each other. And they can be the same teacher. Obviously, can be all three. And once you see your teacher as a Buddha, even if you haven't, let's say you haven't received Tantra instruction from that teacher, if they are your Mahayana teacher, that you consider them your teacher, you consider them a Buddha, then eventually they might be appropriate to give you Tantra instruction if they have received the proper empowerments on their side, right? So your relationship with them is the same. And just because they're not your Tantra guru at the time, they can become that, right? So the same person can be all three, is what I'm saying. They don't have to be different people, but these different people build on each other, right? Whether it's in one person or three different people. And then the idea of a root guru, generally you have hypothetically, you'd only have one root guru, but you can also have more. The root guru is the guru that is able to that you rely upon the most to benefit your mind. And so sometimes, if all your teachers are Buddhas, then they all should be able to benefit your mind the same, right? Because they're all omniscient beings. But for instance, some teachers you have more access to than others, whether it be through their teachings or through one-on-one conversation. And so you might develop a relationship with them that's stronger than, let's say, your relationship with Dalai Lama, right? You might consider Dalai Lama the most important teacher in your life, but you only have very little access to him. So the teacher that is here is more important. So we say the teachers are kinder than the Buddha, right? The teachers are kinder to us than Shakyamuni Buddha. Shakyamuni Buddha realized the Dharma, realized the nature of reality, and taught it in such a way to lead all of us to be free from suffering. And yet, he turned the wheel of Dharma for the first time in this world system, in this cycle, in this eon. And yet, our gurus are kinder than he is, because our gurus are here with us right now, right? And giving us teachings for our time, our place, our age. And so a root guru is the one that has the greatest effect on your mind. You can have more than one, of course. But in general, you usually have one or very few. It depends on the person, though. They say Atisha had over 150 gurus, and he never broke any of his commitments to any of them. And Dromtonpa, one of Atisha's root disciples, had 5 gurus. And that's it. Okay? So you don't have to have an infinite number of gurus. You can. But the more you have, the harder it is. Because you have to see them all. If not as a Buddha, then as a highly realized being who only works for your benefit. And every word that comes from your mouth and every action they do with their body is for your benefit alone. And the more beings you include in that, the harder it is, right? But you see, the more, when you look at a guru, you shouldn't think of them in the same, or any teacher, a spiritual mentor or spiritual teacher. You need to think of that relationship as one that is based on, how do you say, a mind of gratitude and not a mind of transaction, right? This isn't a business transaction. It isn't I come to you and give you something and in exchange you give me Dharma, right? That's not the experience you have with a guru. Even if you're making offerings to your guru, it's not like I'm buying Dharma from you, okay? When you make offerings to a teacher, whether it be to the Buddha or to Lama Zopa or to the center or to a teacher teaching, you make offerings out of a mind of gratitude and out of a mind of joy, not because you're engaging in some sort of transaction with them. So you can have dozens of teachers. It's not like you have to put a down payment for each one, okay? But the more teachers you have, it's just more to hold in your mind. And depending on your individual personality, for some people that's better, and for some people it's not. So you have to see what is appropriate for your mind, knowing that when you officially become someone's student in that way, you're their student for the rest of your life. And they're your teacher for the rest of your life. Like that relationship, once you've formed it, it doesn't ever end. Even if you realize later you were wrong and you chose someone poorly. So we say there are 3 types of spiritual mentors. There's 3 types of spiritual teachers and 3 types of spiritual mentors. Here, when we talk about properly relying upon a guru, we mean on one of the 3 types of spiritual mentors. Relying upon a spiritual teacher, so a professor or a Dharma instructor or a ritual or meditation instructor, you still have to have a mind of respect and a mind recognizing that they know more than you and they can guide you in the path in some meaningful way. But that is not a lifelong relationship that you're forming, okay? It still shouldn't be a business transaction. It should still be one of respect and of endearing, right? And gratitude, but it is not a lifelong relationship. When you form a relationship with a spiritual mentor, whether it be a Vinaya or Pratimoksha teacher, or a Mahayana teacher or a Tantra teacher, that is a relationship that once that is formed is for the rest of your life, okay? And so that one is more important to be careful with. So the first one, that's why you can go into any Dharma center or any FPMT center and you see that person as a Dharma instructor. That relationship doesn't have to exist beyond that one session, right? If you realize that you don't get along with them, you haven't committed yourself to something, right? But if you say, oh no, they're my teacher in a spiritual mentor kind of way, then you have. So it's important to know that distinction. And it's important. Yeah. generally we say from one lifetime. It gets complicated, right? If you rely on someone as your spiritual, as your Lama, so for instance, Lama Zopa Rinpoche is my root teacher, and now he's shown the aspect of passing away. So when they find his tuku, I don't automatically have guru devotion to his tuku. Many people believe that it does. It's not the case. Your devotion to your teacher doesn't span from one lifetime to another. I still have guru devotion to Lama Zopa Rinpoche until I die for this lifetime. But it does not mean I have guru devotion to Lama Zopa Rinpoche's tuku when that tuku is discovered. Because even though that is still Lama Zopa Rinpoche's continuity, right? It's taken a different form. And so I have to actively choose to accept that person as a teacher. Now, many people do. Many people automatically do, right? And that's why you see these like 6-year-olds who have people who, consider them their teacher. And that's fine. But there's no requirement, okay? But you still have a relationship with Lama Zopa Rinpoche or whoever your teacher is, even if they're no longer living. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche is my root teacher, even though he's shown the aspect of passing away. And the beauty of being in this day and age, where we have so many access to recordings and to things like that, is that you receive teachings from them all the time, whether or not they're in your presence. One of the most profound, and I've told this story before, but one of the most profound teachings I had from Lama Zopa Rinpoche was I was in Boston and I was living at Kurikula Center, and so it must have been either my last year of college or after I graduated college, after I graduated grad school, if I was living at the center. And I was working for Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive, and I was doing, we called it light editing. So they had transcripts of all Lama Zopa's teachings, right, that they make available. And I was editing one of the Kopan courses. And if you've been to a lot of teachings with Lama Zopa and you read the transcript, it makes sense. We were trying to edit it in such a way that anyone could read it and benefit from it, but it still sounds like Rinpoche. So don't make it perfectly clean and medicinal, but also make it understandable. Sometimes when Rinpoche is teaching, he'd repeat the same word like 6 or 7 times, and you'd have to limit it down to maybe 2 repetitions, something like this, So I was doing light editing on this teaching from Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And this teaching he had given at Kopan maybe a decade before I was born, not quite, maybe 6 or 7 years before I was born. And I don't remember the exact circumstances, but I was going through something difficult in my life. And in the middle of editing this transcript, it became very clear to me that he was speaking directly to me, that this was the exact answer I needed of what I was doing wrong in my practice and what was I needed to do to fix this obstacle I had in my life. And it was it happened in a moment that I just said, oh, Lama Zopa is teaching directly. Every teaching is direct instruction, right? Every single teaching is a direct instruction. And so I already believed that, but then I just was reading this random transcript that was older than I was. And I was like, oh, this is Lama Zopa teaching me. This is how he's teaching me, right? So we have the luxury in this day and age of having so many recordings, both in audio form, video form, and in written form of all of our teachers, that even if they show the aspect of passing away, or they show the aspect of being very far away from us, we still have access to their teachings, right? Which is very beneficial for us. It was a real moment. I had to sit back from the computer and be like, oh, thank you, But you have to be open to that. So that's why Lama, Tsongkhapa says, if you look at any of Tsongkhapa's commentaries or any of his texts, not his prayers necessarily, but any of his texts, he praises the teachers at the beginning and the end of every single text. Every single text will have prostrations to the holy gurus, and they'll end with dedicating to the holy gurus. Every single text by Tsongkhapa. Not so much in his prayers, right? Because his prayers are often focused on a specific thing, but any commentary he writes always is going to have praise and to the gurus and dedication to the gurus. Every single one. Because Tsongkhapa really says, these are the most important part of our practice. And you really have to open yourself in a way that's meaningful so you can receive it. The word for confession in Buddhism, he said there's the 7 limbs of practice, and one of them is confession, confessing negative actions, is sha. And it means to open up, to tear open, essentially. I often think, and this is something you can, as Indians, you can relate to, is the image of Hanuman ripping his chest open and having the image of Ram or Rama in place of his heart. I think of that a lot as a type of guru devotion. Again, it's not quite the same as Buddhist, but it's a real striking image, right? That image is this is what fuels me, is my devotion to this teacher. And I think of confession and of relating to a guru in the same way. Is you're ripping yourself open for a guru, and not in a physical way, but in a way that says I'm trusting you to understand my mind and to guide my practice. And now I will say that if you look at like historically in Tibet and in India, that doesn't always mean like a personal relationship with the guru. You know, most teachers or most students don't get time to do one-on-one relationship with the guru all the time. You know, their relationship is more about the teacher knows what's appropriate for them and gives them the teachings in the way that they need. As Westerners, we want, I can speak for myself, my experience as learning the Dharma in the West, is we have this idea of our teacher is going to be like a 24-hour like hotline who is going to like be my best friend. In the same way, like you see people that go to a therapist, but they like they want to be friends with their therapist. And you say, no, that's not the role of a therapist. Like they're not your friend. They're doing something, right? And it's similar with the teacher. Depending on our relationship with them, maybe we have time to see FaceTime with them all the time. And maybe we can ask them any question. That's possible. But not every relationship with a teacher is going to look like that. So depending on the teacher and depending on your mind, it might look very different. So for me, you know, Lama Zopa Rinpoche and Nishananda Style Lama are my two root teachers. And I was blessed to receive personal instruction from both of them numerous times. But a lot of times, Lama Zopa would come to Sarah. And he'd come to Sarah and there would just be dozens of people waiting outside his house to go get time to see with him. And I would always go and, you know, make offerings to him and say hello. But a lot of time, if I'm going to ask his advice, he already gave me the advice, was to go to Sarah, become a geshe. Like he gave me that advice. You know what I mean? And so that was the advice I needed. And so to ask about specific things, he's like, you know what you're doing. Like I don't need to give you, he didn't need to give me like a bullet point for every single part of my practice because he'd already given me the part of my practice, right? And then if I had doubts or obstacles, then, you know, I had a couple doubts and I went and I said, I'm having this big problem. And he said, oh, you should do this. So I had a chance to ask them. But there are some students who want every single question answered. And sometimes that's the appropriate relationship, right? Sometimes that's okay. But that's not always what it's going to look like. So when you find someone who you relate to as a guru, it doesn't mean they have to be someone that you see all the time, that you have, you know, a relationship where you are like living with them, you know? So that may be one type of relationship, but don't expect that. You have to be open to see what kind of relationship it's going to be. I think that's a good place to end. How about some questions? Any questions? We have a few minutes. Yeah.
Sometimes the word reliance is used a bit synonymously with taking refuge, or like taking refuge is explained as relying on the objects of refuge. Would you say then that Guru devotion can also be said like correctly taking refuge in the Guru?
Yes, but the way to properly rely upon a teacher is also to recognize them as embodying all of the three jewels. So when you rely on a teacher, even in a Pratimoksha teacher, so I don't like the idea of low, middle, or high, talking about the three types of spiritual mentor, but the lowest one, even I don't like not grading them as quality, but you know what I mean? Like the first one, a Pratimoksha one, even that one, you recognize them as the embodiment of all three jewels of refuge. And so in order to rely on them properly, would be relying on them the way you rely on refuge. Yes, for all levels of a teacher. It's interesting, in Tibetan, the word for relying, they're etymologically the same, but they're spelled differently. So when we say to rely upon a teacher, lama tensul, and we say rely on the three jewels, the kunchoksum, the tene, the ten is the same, but it's spelled differently, but it sounds the exact same because it's etymologically the same. Like relying on something, it can mean like physically, like this is relying upon the table to stay in place, like a physical reliance, and then an emotional reliance are slightly different words. But anyway, sorry, you don't need etymology. I've given you enough etymology today. That yes, to rely on a teacher properly, you recognize that teacher as being the embodiment of all three jewels of refuge. So they are the Buddha jewel. And even if you don't see the teacher as a Buddha, they're still embodying the Buddha jewel for you. Okay, so even if you have a proper guru-disciple relationship wherein you don't see the teacher as a Buddha, maybe because they're a Pratimoksha teacher or a Mahayana teacher who you haven't accepted as a Buddha, but just a realized or an accomplished being, you still see them as embodying the Buddha jewel and embodying the Dharma jewel. So the Buddha jewel, insofar as that they're the ones teaching the Dharma and displaying it through their actions of body, speech, and mind. The Dharma jewel, insofar as they embody the actual teachings of the Buddha in practice And then the Sangha jewel, in that they are the community who supports the practice. So to properly rely on a teacher, you do have to recognize them as the embodiment of all three jewels. Yeah.
You mentioned that the teacher, right, who accepted as a teacher, will be probably for this lifetime.
Mhm.
I see some text here. It says like, please guide me always without separation in this life, future life, and body.
Yeah.
So that we are talking about the teacher, physical teacher in this life, or we're talking about Buddha.
Well, what we're saying is, so technically, when you develop a relationship with a guru, so a student, an actual student-teacher relationship, that only technically lasts for this life, for as long as you're alive. But our request to that teacher, whether we see them as a Buddha or just as a wise elder, is that they will guide us in this life and in all future lives as well. And in the bardo being the space between this life and future lives. So even if we don't see a teacher as a Buddha, we still see them as embodying the Buddha jewel, and we're requesting their guidance up until Buddhahood, right? So ideally, that teacher will be our teacher in all of our future lives until we're a Buddha. And by developing a relationship with them now, that makes that more likely. But it doesn't, you have to renew that relationship again in your next life, right? It's not automatic. But for instance, especially those of us who are convert Buddhists, who didn't grow up in Buddhist communities, to find teachers who teach us the Dharma, most likely we met them in previous lives, right? Because it's so uncommon for us. Look at how many non-Buddhists or converted Buddhists there are, right? There's so few. So there's something about our past lives that drew us a connection. We can even say that those of us here together at CKSL, in the past, and now again, I don't know anything about our past lives. I don't have any understanding of that. But just understanding how karma works, it's very likely that in past lives, we had a relationship of some sort. And that is what allowed us to come together as a Dharma community, that we have a relationship with each other. And so the more time we spend together, we create more seeds that in the future that can happen again. And it's even stronger with our teachers. So we're requesting our teachers to guide us all the way to Buddhahood. But we have to renew that relationship in life after life.
Also, that depends on the feats you have, and also the karma.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But that's why we try to develop positive karma now. And so we make those requests. And one of the, I didn't get into it, we'll start our next class with it, but of the benefits of properly relying on a guru, one of the most important benefits is that it is easier to find an appropriate Mahayana guru in future lives. You know, when you develop really good guru devotion in this life, then in the next lives, in future lives, you meet with them more quickly and you have less obstacles to developing teachers, right? And so part of the work we're doing now, I mean, we have to remember that the work we're doing now is for this life and all future lives as well, you know?
I'd like to visualize a teacher during specific periods. For instance, calling the guru from afar when we say, Lama, think of me. But I don't have a teacher right now. So who would you say is a good person or a teacher to visualize?
I'd say Shakyamuni Buddha, right? And so like, you were here yesterday for the Lama Chopa, right?
Yeah.
So for Lama Chopa, the visualization for Lama Chopa is we visualize Tsongkhapa, but we visualize our guru, whoever they may be, taking the form of Tsongkhapa, and then at his heart is Shakyamuni, and at his heart is Vajradhara, we take in Tantra, right? So you can visualize Shakyamuni Buddha, or if you are really strongly connected to this lineage, Tsongkhapa, either one of those are appropriate. And so if you don't have an actual teacher right now, you visualize either Shakyamuni Buddha or Tsongkhapa, or you can visualize Dalai Lama, even if he isn't your actual teacher, but you have a lot of respect for him and recognize him as a realized being. And they are serving as your spiritual teacher during that practice, even if you haven't officially created that relationship with them. And the benefit of that, of doing someone like Shakyamuni Buddha or Tsongkhapa, is that later, when you do a practice like Lama Chopa, when you do have a relationship with a teacher, the visualization is the same, but you imbue it with the essence of your teacher, right? So you don't have to change everything all of a sudden. Usually when you do guru devotion, well, I won't say that, not usually. That's a hard thing to say, but quite often when you're doing guru devotion practices, you don't always visualize your teacher in their body in this life. You visualize them as some sort of Buddha, whether it be as Shakyamuni Buddha or as a Tantric Buddha or as, Avalokiteshvara or something like this. You quite often are visualizing a Buddha who is your teacher. Your teacher has taken that aspect, right? So you don't often visualize your teacher in whatever form they have. Though sometimes, if you go to Tushita Center in Dharamsala or above in McLeod Ganj, they have what's called the Vajrasattva Gompa. They have a couple different Gompas. They have the main Gompa, and they have Medicine Buddha Gompa and the Vajrasattva Gompa. So in the Vajrasattva Gompa, there is Vajrasattva, mother and father, is like the main statue. But the face of Vajrasattva looks like Lama Yeshe. And so if, for anyone that's met Lama Yeshe, you see the statue for the first time and you're like, and they made the statue look like Lama Yeshe because he is the founder of FPMT and Lama Zopa's root teacher. So sometimes their physical body is kept within the Buddhas. But in general, I would say Shakyamuni Buddha or Tsongkhapa are good places to start, because they represent all Buddhas in that way. Yeah.
And from this holiness, if you receive some transmissions, even in a group, that considered like your guru giving a
Yes.
transmission.
So if you receive a transmission, technically, if you receive any transmission from a teacher, then you have to accept them as a guru in order to receive that transmission. And so in the case of His Holiness, if it was like the Lamrim teachings, then you would have him as a Mahayana teacher, that middling one. If they were tantric transmission, then he'd have to consider him a tantric teacher, right? And now these days, if you look back the way it used to be and the way the texts teach about it, like a tantric initiation, a lot of time there'd be no more than like 5 students at a time receiving that initiation. It'll only be to small select groups,
Secret,
Yeah, because it's very small. It's practiced in that way. And even giving it transmissions of teachings, of sutra teachings, are done to select groups that weren't done to big audiences historically. Now, His Holiness, he gave Kalachakra and Bodh Gaya to 350,000 people. And from his point of view, he says this is such a powerful text that to have any relationship with it at all is important and creates good karma, right? But so you could go to those teachings and you receive the blessing of him, but not everyone is really receiving the transmission or the initiation, right? So if you're in a space with a teacher giving a transmission and you actually believe that you're receiving that transmission, then you have to accept them as a guru. If you're like, oh, I'm just kind of here to get the vibes and to and I say that flippantly, but sometimes that's appropriate. Like, I don't know this person, but I respect them. And I know there's some blessings here. And if they think, not all teachers allow that. Some say, no, like if you're here, you have to be 100%. But some teachers are like, no, it's okay. You can just come and, get the vibes. And so if that's your attitude, then you don't have to take them as a teacher, but you're also not receiving the transmission, right? So
His Holiness also says that you can get the transmission.
yeah, these days, His Holiness says that, and not everyone agrees. Some people are very much like, you can't receive transmissions or empowerments online. Who knows? You know what? If His Holiness is the one giving the transmission and he says you can, then I say okay. And if another one of my teachers is giving it and they say you can't, then when they're giving it, then I can't. It's more important that whatever the teacher that's giving it says, then that's what I'm going to follow if they're my teacher, But so, yes, if you receive a transmission from someone and you actually believe that you've received that transmission, then you have to have a guru-disciple relationship with them, which is a good example of how, you don't, I've received how many transmissions from His Holiness, but I don't get to talk to him about them and ask him to clarify my doubts. You know what I mean? That doesn't happen, So you have to, that relationship is like a distance relationship.
Yoga mind, right? That's a tantric.
That is a tantric practice, the non-dual yoga mind, or whatever it's called. I don't remember the full name. But if you look at the practice, it's tantra insofar as it involves visualization, but it is perfectly aligned with sutra practice as well. And all it is visualizing wisdom and emptiness in specific forms, and then them unifying in your mind as your mind lets wisdom and emptiness unify. And so yoga, right? The word yoga means to join. And so the yoga mind of wisdom and emptiness is recognizing that wisdom and emptiness are inseparable. And so it's a visualization to go with that. So His Holiness does teach that quite a lot in non-Tantra contexts. So if he's teaching in a non-Tantra context, then you would not have to have him as a tantric guru. You'd only have him as a Mahayana guru in that context, even though the practice comes from Tantra. Very similar to taking precepts, 8 Mahayana precepts, the way we teach them are taught from one of the Tantras, from Kriya Tantra, actually, which is why we visualize Avalokiteshvara. And when you're doing the precepts, you're not supposed to eat black foods, right? Because that has to do with practices of Kriya Tantra, where your external practices are quite important. So technically, that is a Tantra practice. But you can receive teachings from, you don't have to receive it. You can receive those vows or precepts just from a visualization of Avalokiteshvara. You don't have to have a physical human being giving it. But if you have someone that's giving those precepts, you can take them as a Mahayana teacher, not a Tantric teacher. Like that is possible as well. So sometimes, depending on the practice, there are lines blurred. But if someone's giving you, and for instance, I know we've gone over time, so I won't go much longer here, but just because this is an important point, and I'm sure it'll come up later. So if let's say you've taken someone as a teacher, not as a Tantric teacher, but just as a Mahayana teacher, but then they give some introduction to Tantra. You can still receive that from them. It doesn't make them your Tantric guru necessarily, right? Just because you received Tantra instruction. In the same way, you can come to an FPMT center and receive introductory Tantra instruction from myself or Venerable Keldenla or others and not accept us as a teacher, accept us only as a Dharma instructor who you have respect for, who is teaching a Tantra subject. And there are certain lines that like a teacher won't cross. Like Geshe Namdak, when he gave instruction on 6-session Guru Yoga, he only wanted people that were that would consider him a teacher because he was going into actual practice. You know what I mean? So it depends on the teacher, but you can receive instruction to a certain level on introductory topics in Tantra without having that person as a guru as well. Okay, let's end there. It's already 8 o'clock, so we'll do some quick prayers to end out. But just as a reminder, finding books might be difficult, but if you go to lamayeshe.com, to the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive website, and just search for 50 stanzas, or 50 verses, I think they call it there. Yeah, 50 verses, they call it. And you'll find that there are 2 commentaries you can download as PDFs, and they are both by Geshe Losam Darge, right? Nawan Darge. And so I would encourage you to read those. We're not going to get through all 50 verses until the end of the class. Like we're going to take our time with it, but it can at least give you some things to think about for questions. And then other texts, like I said, Alexander Berzin's text, Gareth Sparham's translation of Tsongkhapa, and His Holiness's texts all have more context. And also just Lamrim, the first sections of Lamrim, as well as Bongar Moshe's Liberation and Palmyra End, also have really good sections on Guru devotion. So you can read those on your own, and that can give you more questions to bring to class for future classes. Okay, let us conclude with the dedication prayers on page 36. So we have taken time to come together this evening to study the holy teachings of the Buddha, to ignite our inner fires of revolution, to be free from the suffering of samsara, right? And by doing that, we have accumulated some sort of merit. Through our intentionality and through our practice, through our study, we've accumulated some good karma. And instead of keeping that for ourselves, we dedicate that karma, we dedicate that merit to all sentient beings. So all sentient beings who are suffering, may our good karma ripen on them. We wish that all benefit that we've accumulated today might ripen on others, that they might be free from suffering, they quickly and more quickly achieve the state of perfect Buddhahood, that they might quickly meet with Mahayana spiritual friends who can guide them on the path. And this is what we dedicate. And so we will recite the dedication prayers as well as the long life prayer for His Holiness. We'll do them all in English. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. Great. Thank you all so much for coming today. I appreciate it. And I look forward to continue the series as we get deeper into what it means to properly rely on a guru. So I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you. And all of you came online, thank you so much.